Will India, being the most populous country in the world, have an impact on economic growth? Will it overtake China and other Asian countries with its cheap labor to attract new investment? What is its history, and how did it become the most populated country in the world in 2023? What are the characteristics of your current population? Will the future have the same demographic and economic problems that China faces today? In this video, we're going to be answering each of these questions. So, let's get started. 1 in 3 people in the world today lives in India or China. The demographic growth rates of both countries tell two different stories. On the one hand, China is experiencing a significant population decline due to the aging of its inhabitants, but also due to the low birth rate. In 2022, China's population shrank for the first time in more than 60 years. India, on the other hand, is experiencing the effects of a demographic explosion that began in the mid-20th century. From 1950 to the mid-1980s, the country's population grew by 2.3% annually. Now it continues to grow, although at a slower rate. In 2019, the Indian government announced birth control measures, but changed its mind after the rapid decline in fertility rates, from 3.4 children per woman in 1992 to 2.1 in 2020. Growth will continue at least until 2060 due to the so-called population impulse. This demographic effect occurs when there's rapid growth in the population driven by its youth. There are more people of reproductive age, while the birth rate decreases. This greater youth in the workforce will have a worldwide effect. We can call this the demographic dividend. This means that India has a very interesting demographic advantage for its economic growth. A rising middle class and rising per capita income set the stage for a boom in consumption and investment. To better understand this phenomenon, let's first review the history of India with its respective demographic characteristics. At the beginning of the 18th century, India had only 137 million inhabitants. This number rose to about 255 million in 100 years and fluctuated 20% up and down during the 18th century. Only since the beginning of the 20th century has population growth increased dramatically, but it has been losing some momentum for about 50 years. Last year, India surpassed China and became the country with the most population in the world. But going into more detail, India experienced rapid population growth, almost 2% annually for much of the second half of the last century. Over time, death rates fell, life expectancy increased, and incomes grew. More people, especially those living in cities, gained access to clean drinking water and modern sewage. According to Tim Dyson, a demographer at the London School of Economics, India launched a family planning program in 1952 and established a national population policy for the first time in 1976, when China was busy reducing its birth rate. However, this policy of forced sterilization of millions of poor people provoked a social reaction against family planning. This caused subsequent governments to act cautiously regarding this policy. East Asian countries such as South Korea, Malaysia, Taiwan, and Thailand, which launched population programs much later than India, achieved lower birth rates, reduced infant and maternal mortality rates, increased incomes, and improved development before India. In India, the birth rate has reduced substantially in recent decades, going from 5.7 births per woman in 1950 to 2 today. But the pace of decline has been slower. Between 1960 and 2023, India's population increased from 450,550,000 to 1,430,000,000. This represents an increase of 216.5% in 63 years. The highest increase in India was recorded in 1974, with 2.36%. The smallest increase in 2023, with 0.61%. In the same period, the total population of all countries in the world increased by 162.2%. The average age in India increased by 3.43 years from 2012 to 2023, from 26.07 to 29.5 years, median value. Since its independence in 1947, India has added more than 1 billion people, and its population is expected to grow for another 40 years. Now let's analyze how this abundant labor force can generate a demographic dividend for India, now taking advantage of the new demographic problems facing China. If you're enjoying the video, I invite you to like it and subscribe to the channel. Now, it's important to mention China's current demographic situation, as this will help us better explain what could happen to India's abundant labor force in the world economy. Early last year, the Chinese government announced that for the first time in decades, the number of deaths had exceeded the number of births. Now, China is going to pay a high price, since this very large generation is of retirement age and begins to depend on the younger generation that will have to pay for their parents' pension. To this, we have to add that it was precisely a large and massive, and therefore cheap workforce that supplied human capital to the factories that produce goods that could be exported around the world. Currently, a more educated and less numerous population has been achieved, which makes it a more expensive labor force and probably unsuitable for manufacturing jobs. This generalized wage increase has made China no longer such an attractive destination for relevant industrial ventures, and many companies that need intensive, and above all, cheap labor, are looking for other, more favorable destinations, such as Mexico or Vietnam. At the same time, the negative effect of one of the engines of the economy, the real estate sector, will be noticeable. We must not forget that population growth is essential for the development of residential real estate activity, especially when achieving real estate ownership is a sociologically very relevant factor for Chinese idiosyncrasy. In short, and in a few words, China is in a dramatic situation. It's becoming old before it has become rich. By contrast, India is in a very different position. The most relevant element of the enormous Indian population is its youth. Thus, according to an article in Time magazine, 650 million Americans, slightly less than half of its population, are under 25 years old. In addition to new opportunities at the UN, population leadership allows India to accelerate its economic growth. The average age in the country is 29 years, compared to 38 in China. New Delhi can emulate the system built by Deng Xiaoping in its northern neighbor, attracting foreign companies with cheap labor. India has a considerable arsenal of potential workers who lack education and job protection. Unlike their Chinese or Malaysian counterparts, India is spoken of as the new factory of the world, judging by megalopolises like Bangalore, which according to some predictions will be able to compete in the future with the giants of Shanghai, Shenzhen, and Hong Kong. Furthermore, India is considerably more economically liberal than its communist neighbor at the time of its economic takeoff, which would allow it to avoid the defects of the extensive corruption of the mixed system established by Deng. In this sense, experts maintain that India will not reach its maximum population until the year 2065, which implies that although the number can be reduced to one boy or girl per couple, the population will continue to grow in absolute terms until it stabilizes. And precisely this factor of the youth of its population gives the Indian economy enormous growth potential, making the concept of the demographic dividend, which benefited China so much in previous decades, play in its favor. According to the UN definition in its World Population Report, the demographic dividend represents a great opportunity to exponentially accelerate social development, and above all, economic growth motivated by the increase in the working-age population. In this phase, the dependency ratios fall and make it possible to mobilize more resources to increase investments in health, employment, education, infrastructure, pensions, and social protection, thus boosting growth as has happened in China. This important population segment is not only characterized by its youth, but above all by its dynamism, since it's grown up in a market economy with the ambition to compete globally and with permanent access to the internet. Thus, 2/3 of India's population has access to smartphones, having promoted access to data at a good price in the last decade. This young population is strongly driving economic growth, being decisive in the fact that consumption has skyrocketed and simultaneously generating a notable boom in innovation, having turned India into an information economy on a global scale. Furthermore, it will allow India to develop a dimension in which it still has a long way to go to become a manufacturing power. Until now, India has been less dependent on industry than other emerging economies. Indeed, compared to China, where industrial activities represent 27% of GDP, India still represents 14% of GDP. To do this, India is attracting very powerful international groups such as Apple. The results are beginning to be evident economically, with the Indian economy reaching 5th place in the world economy, which implies that it has already surpassed the United Kingdom. In this regard, Narendra Modi stated, We've left behind those who governed us for 250 years. A statement published by El País in its article on April 9, 2023. This economic strengthening has repercussions in the geostrategic and political sphere. In this way, currently, India has achieved leadership in the G20 during the year 2023. Furthermore, as a founding member of the UN, it's in a position to fight for a change in the status quo, to become, justly, a permanent member of the Security Council. On the other hand, it can adopt a more active role in diplomatic relations and try to intercede with Russia, with which it maintains a very close relationship and which it has not condemned for its invasion of Ukraine, to achieve a viable solution that contributes to putting an end to the war with Ukraine. With all this, I ask a question to you who are watching this video. It's a country that has the largest population in the world and therefore offers low-cost labor for the global production of large companies, in short, enough to escape poverty. If you like this video, I invite you to subscribe and leave your like for more videos like this one. We'll see you next time.